The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the convoy of armored vehicles as they moved through the rocky terrain of Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her medical pack and checked her radio for the third time in 10 minutes. Something felt wrong about this mission, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what. "Santos, you good back there?" called out Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison from the driver's seat. His voice carried the easy confidence that came from 5 years of special operations. But Maria caught the slight edge that meant he felt it too. "All set." "Morrison," she replied, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. As the team's combat medic, she had learned to trust her instincts. They had kept her alive through 3 deployments and countless firefights. The SEAL team she was attached to represented some of the Navy's finest. Team leader Lieutenant Commander David Hayes sat in the passenger seat, studying satellite images on his tablet. Behind her, Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Rodriguez cleaned his weapon with the methodical precision of a man who had done it 1,000 times before. In the rear vehicle, the rest of the 8-man team maintained their usual pre-mission focus. Maria had been working with SEAL teams for 2 years now, but this particular group had become like family. They respected her skills, trusted her judgment, and never once questioned her ability to keep up with their demanding pace. She was one of only a handful of female medics authorized to deploy with special operations units, and she had earned her place through sheer determination and exceptional medical expertise. The landscape around them was desolate, all brown rocks and scattered scrub brush. Intel suggested Taliban fighters had been using this route to move weapons and personnel between villages. Their mission was simple: locate and neutralize a high-value target who was supposedly meeting with local insurgent leaders in a compound about 5 clicks ahead. 2 minutes out, Hayes announced, his voice crackling through their headsets. "Remember, we want this guy alive if possible. He's got information about planned attacks on coalition forces." Maria double-checked her medical supplies: combat gauze, tourniquets, morphine, saline bags. Everything was exactly where it should be. She had treated everything from minor cuts to life-threatening injuries in the field. Her teammates joked that she could perform surgery with a Swiss Army knife if necessary, and they weren't entirely wrong. The vehicles came to a stop behind a ridge that provided cover from the target compound. Hayes gathered the team around a small tactical map spread across the hood of their lead vehicle. The plan was straightforward. Rodriguez and 2 others would provide overwatch from elevated positions, while Hayes led the main assault team through the compound's front entrance. Maria would stay with the vehicles initially, ready to move forward when needed. "Questions?" Hayes asked, scanning the faces of his men. The team moved with practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role without need for further instruction. Maria watched through binoculars as they approached the compound, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. Intelligence reports suggested anywhere from 6 to 12 enemy combatants might be inside. For the first few minutes, everything went according to plan. The Overwatch team reported no movement in the surrounding area. Hayes and his assault team reached the compound wall without being detected. Then Rodriguez's voice came through the radio. Tense and urgent. "Movement on the ridgeline, 200 meters northeast. Looks like a flanking force." Maria felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of complication that turned routine missions into disasters. Through her binoculars, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions. The Taliban fighters had set up an ambush, using the compound as bait. "We're taking fire from multiple directions," Hayes reported, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around him. "Santos, we're going to need you up here." Without hesitation, Maria grabbed her medical bag and started running toward the compound. Bullets whined overhead and kicked up dust around her feet. But she had learned long ago to push fear aside and focus on the job. Her teammates needed her. She reached the compound wall just as an explosion shook the ground. A rocket-propelled grenade had struck one of the buildings, sending debris flying in all directions. Through the smoke and dust, she could see Hayes waving her toward a wounded SEAL who had taken shrapnel to his leg. Petty Officer Second Class Mike Chen was conscious but bleeding heavily. Maria quickly assessed the wound. Multiple pieces of shrapnel had penetrated his thigh. Missing the femoral artery by inches, She applied a tourniquet above the injury and started an IV line while bullets continued to snap overhead. "You're going to be fine," she told Chen, her voice steady and reassuring. "Just a flesh wound. You'll be back to annoying us in no time." Chen managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Doc. I owe you one." The firefight continued for another 20 minutes. Maria treated 2 more wounded SEALs while staying low and moving between covered positions. Her hands remained steady, even as explosions rocked the compound around them. This was what she had trained for, providing medical care under the worst possible conditions. Finally, air support arrived. 2 Apache helicopters swept in, their chain guns chattering as they engaged the Taliban positions on the ridgeline. The enemy fire quickly diminished, and Hayes was able to secure the compound. Unfortunately, their high-value target had escaped during the chaos, but they had captured several lower-level fighters and recovered valuable intelligence documents. As the team prepared to evacuate their wounded, Maria noticed Morrison sitting against a wall, his face pale and his breathing shallow. He had insisted he was fine, but something about his posture worried her. "Morrison, let me take a look at you," she said, approaching with her medical bag. "I'm good, Doc," he protested weakly. "Just got my bell rung by that RPG blast." Maria knelt beside him and began a quick examination. His pupils were equal and reactive, but his pulse was rapid and thready. When she pressed on his abdomen, he winced and tried to pull away. "You're not fine," she said firmly. "You've got internal bleeding. We need to get you to a trauma center immediately." Hayes appeared beside them, his face grim. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Maria replied, starting another IV line. "He needs surgery within the next hour, or we're going to lose him." The extraction helicopter was still 15 minutes away. Morrison's condition was deteriorating rapidly, his blood pressure dropping despite the IV fluids Maria was pushing. She had seen this before. Blunt force trauma from explosions could cause internal organs to tear, leading to massive bleeding that wasn't immediately obvious. "Stay with me, Morrison," she said, monitoring his pulse. "Tell me about that girlfriend back in Virginia Beach." "Sarah," Morrison mumbled, his voice getting weaker. "Going to marry her when I get back." "That's right. She's waiting for you, so you better not quit on me now." Maria worked frantically, using every technique she had learned to keep Morrison stable. She administered blood-clotting agents and positioned him to maximize blood flow to his vital organs. But despite her efforts, she could see him slipping away. The sound of rotor blades finally filled the air as the medevac helicopter approached. Maria had kept Morrison alive, but barely. As the flight medic took over his care, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. "Outstanding work, Santos," Hayes said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You saved his life." Maria nodded, but didn't feel much like celebrating. Morrison still had a long road ahead of him, and the mission had been only partially successful. As they loaded into their extraction helicopter, she reflected on how quickly things could go wrong in their line of work. The flight back to their forward operating base was quiet, except for the steady thrum of the helicopter's engines. The wounded SEALs were stable, thanks to Maria's quick action and medical expertise. She had once again proven herself under fire, earning the respect and gratitude of her teammates. But as they flew over the Afghan landscape, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was bothering Hayes. He kept glancing at her with a strange expression, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. She had noticed him paying closer attention to her techniques during the medical emergencies, watching how she handled the pressure and made critical decisions. Back at base, Maria helped transfer the wounded to the base hospital before heading to her quarters to clean up and write her after-action report. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally drained from the intensity of the mission. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Hayes stood in the doorway, his expression serious. "We need to talk, Santos," he said. "There's something about today that's been bothering me." Maria felt her stomach clench, though she wasn't sure why. "What do you mean, sir?" Hayes stepped into her quarters and closed the door behind him. "I've been watching you work for 2 years now. You're good, better than good, but there are things about your technique, your decision-making under pressure, that don't add up." I don't understand, Maria said, though she was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. Most medics, even experienced ones, show some hesitation when dealing with complex trauma. They follow protocols, consult reference materials, call for advice. You don't. You work like someone who has seen everything before, like someone with years of emergency room experience. Hayes paused, studying her face. But, according to your personnel file, you went straight from medical training to special operations. No civilian experience, no trauma center rotations. So where did you learn to work like a veteran surgeon? Maria remained silent, her mind racing. She had always known this day might come, when someone would start asking questions about inconsistencies in her background. Hayes was too good an officer not to notice the details that didn't quite fit. I've been doing some checking, Hayes continued. Your records are clean, but they're also remarkably sparse for someone with your level of skill. It's like your life started the day you enlisted in the Navy. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of helicopters landing and taking off from the base's flight line. Maria sat on her bunk, weighing her options. She could continue to maintain the carefully constructed story she had been living for the past 4 years, or she could trust these men who had become her brothers with the truth. Sir, my background is exactly what my personnel file says it is, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Hayes shook his head. Santos, I've seen you save lives today that experienced trauma surgeons might have lost. You work with a level of confidence and skill that comes from years of practice, not military training. I'm not trying to cause you problems, but as your commanding officer, I need to know who I'm really working with. Maria stood up and walked to the small window in her quarters, looking out at the busy activity of the forward operating base. Helicopters, ground vehicles, and personnel moved with the constant urgency of military operations. This had been her world for 4 years, and these men had become her family. Did she really want to risk losing it all? The mission went well today, she said, not turning around. Our people are alive because we all did our jobs. Isn't that what matters? It matters, Hayes agreed. But so does trust. This team works because we know everything about each other. We know each other's strengths, weaknesses, backgrounds, motivations. That's how we stay alive. He paused, then added more softly. Whatever your story is, Santos, it doesn't change the fact that you're one of the best medics I've ever worked with. But if there's something in your past that could affect this team's safety or mission effectiveness, I need to know about it. Maria turned back to face him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. Hayes wasn't trying to destroy her career or expose some scandal. He was trying to protect his team, which included her. The question was whether she trusted him enough to share a secret she had been hiding for 4 years. Give me some time to think about it, sir, she said. This isn't an easy conversation for me. Hayes nodded. 24 hours, Santos. Then we talk again. After he left, Maria sat alone in her quarters, staring at a photograph she kept in her medical bag. It showed her in a different uniform, in a different life. When she had been someone else entirely, she had hoped that part of her past would never catch up with her new life. But perhaps it was time to stop running from who she used to be. The truth was far more complicated than Hayes could imagine, and revealing it would change everything about how her teammates saw her. But keeping it secret might be even more dangerous, both for her and for the men who depended on her to keep them alive. Outside, the sounds of base activity continued as the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new dangers, and new challenges. But first, Maria had to decide whether to trust her team with the truth about her past. A truth that would shock them more than they could possibly imagine. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Morrison had survived surgery but would need months of recovery before returning to active duty. The team gathered in the briefing room, their usual energy subdued by the sobering reminder of how quickly their dangerous work could turn deadly. Maria sat at the back of the room, the photograph from her medical bag now tucked away but its weight heavy on her mind. She had spent most of the night wrestling with Hayes' ultimatum. In a few hours, She would have to make a decision that could end the life she had carefully built for herself. "We've got a new mission," Hayes announced, pulling up satellite images on the briefing room's main screen. "High-priority target in Helmand Province. Intelligence suggests a bomb-making cell is operating out of a medical clinic in a village called Marja." The images showed a small compound with several buildings, including one marked with a red crescent symbol. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, studying the layout. "A medical clinic?" he asked. "Are we sure about this intel?" Hayes nodded grimly. "Multiple sources confirm it. They're using the clinic as a front, while manufacturing IEDs in the basement. The local population doesn't know what's really happening there." Maria felt her stomach tighten. The idea of terrorists using a medical facility for weapons production violated everything she believed about the sanctity of healing. Medical facilities were supposed to be neutral ground, places where anyone could receive help regardless of politics or allegiances. "What's the plan?" asked Chen, who was still moving carefully due to his bandaged leg but had insisted on staying with the team rather than being evacuated. "We go in tomorrow night," Hayes explained. "Primary objective is to capture or eliminate the bomb makers and destroy their equipment. Secondary objective is to secure any intelligence about planned attacks." He paused, looking around the room. "The complication is that there might be legitimate patients in the clinic. We need to be extremely careful about civilian casualties." After the briefing, the team dispersed to prepare their equipment and study the mission details. Maria was checking her medical supplies when Hayes approached her workstation. "Santos, we need to have that conversation now," he said quietly. Maria looked around the busy equipment room. Several other SEALs were within earshot, cleaning weapons and organizing gear. "Can we do this somewhere more private?" Hayes led her to a small office used for planning sessions. He closed the door and activated a white noise generator that would prevent their conversation from being overheard. "Before you say anything," he began, "I want you to know that whatever your background is, it doesn't change my opinion of you as a medic or as a member of this team." Maria sat down across from him, taking a deep breath. 4 years of careful secrecy were about to end, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. "My real name is Maria Elena Vasquez," she began. "Santos is my mother's maiden name. I took it when I enlisted in the Navy." Hayes nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Before I joined the military, I was a trauma surgeon at San Antonio General Hospital in Texas. I had just completed my residency and was working in one of the busiest emergency departments in the state." This revelation clearly surprised Hayes. "A surgeon? That explains your skills, but why join the Navy? Why hide your medical degree?" Maria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the base's medical facility. "Because I killed someone," she said quietly. "A patient died because of my mistakes, and I couldn't live with what I had done." The room fell silent. Hayes waited patiently for her to continue, understanding that this was difficult for her to share. "His name was David Martinez," Maria continued. "He was 23 years old, about the same age as Chen. He came into the emergency department after a motorcycle accident. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding, several broken bones." She paused, the memory still painful after all these years. "He reminded me of my younger brother. Same smile, same way of making jokes even when he was hurt. I took personal charge of his case, instead of following standard protocol and having the attending physician oversee everything." Hayes could see where this was heading, but he remained silent. "I made a surgical decision that I wasn't experienced enough to make. I thought I could repair a torn artery without calling in a vascular surgeon. I was wrong. David bled out on the operating table because of my arrogance." Maria turned back to face Hayes, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "The hospital investigation cleared me officially. They said it was a complex case, and that any surgeon might have made the same decision. But I knew the truth. David Martinez died because I let my emotions cloud my judgment." "So you left medicine?" Hayes asked gently. "I couldn't save lives anymore," Maria replied. "Every time I looked at a patient, I saw David's face. I started making mistakes, second-guessing myself. The chief of surgery suggested I take a leave of absence. Maybe consider changing specialties. She sat back down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Instead, I walked away from everything. My career, my apartment, my entire life. I changed my name and enlisted in the Navy because I wanted to serve in a different way. Hayes processed this information, understanding now why Maria's medical skills seemed so advanced compared to her official training. The Navy doesn't know about your surgical background? No. I listed my college degree, but not my medical school training. Technically, I never lied on any forms. I just didn't volunteer information they didn't specifically ask for. That's a pretty significant omission, Santos. I know, Maria admitted. But I was afraid they wouldn't accept me into the program if they knew I had failed as a surgeon. I wanted to start over, to use my medical knowledge in a different way. Hayes leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. As Maria's commanding officer, he had a responsibility to report any discrepancies in personnel records, but he also recognized that her surgical background actually made her more valuable to the team, not less. What changed? He asked. What made you able to practice medicine again? Maria thought about this question, one she had asked herself many times over the past 4 years. I think it was working with you and the team. In combat medicine, the decisions are more clear-cut. Either someone lives or dies based on immediate actions. There's no time for self-doubt or emotional involvement. She paused, then added, and maybe it's because I've already experienced the worst-case scenario. I know what it's like to lose a patient, so I'm not paralyzed by fear of failure anymore. Hayes nodded slowly. That explains your calm under pressure. Most medics show stress in high-intensity situations, but you seem to get more focused. Because I'm not thinking about myself, Maria replied. I'm only thinking about keeping my patients alive. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Rodriguez's voice came through the intercom. Sir, we've got updated intelligence on tomorrow's mission. You need to see this. Hayes looked at Maria. We'll continue this conversation later. For now, I'm not reporting anything about your background. But we will need to figure out what to do about your personnel records. Thank you, sir, Maria said, relief evident in her voice. They returned to the briefing room, where Rodriguez had new satellite images displayed on the main screen. The pictures showed increased activity around the clinic, with several vehicles and more people moving in and out of the compound. Looks like they're accelerating their timeline, Rodriguez explained. Intel suggests they're planning to move their operation within the next 48 hours. Hayes studied the images carefully. That means we move tonight instead of tomorrow. How's everyone's equipment status? The team quickly confirmed they were ready to deploy on short notice. Maria double-checked her medical supplies, grateful for the distraction from her emotional conversation with Hayes. As they prepared for the mission, she couldn't help but think about the parallel between her past and present situations. In San Antonio, she had been treating patients in a sterile hospital environment. Tonight, she would be working in a hostile environment where the medical clinic was being used to create weapons designed to kill and maim. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had left medicine because she couldn't save one patient, and now she was part of a team whose mission was to destroy a facility that was masquerading as a place of healing. The team departed the base as the sun was setting, traveling in 2 vehicles toward their target. The landscape was different from their previous mission, more populated, with scattered villages and agricultural areas. This meant more potential civilians in the area, which would complicate their operation. Maria rode with Hayes and Rodriguez in the lead vehicle, while Chen and the rest of the team followed in the second truck. Despite his recent injury, Chen had convinced Hayes to let him participate in the mission, arguing that they needed every man available. Intel says the clinic has been operating as a legitimate medical facility for about 6 months, Hayes explained over their radio headsets. The bomb-making started more recently. Probably within the last month. Any idea how many people might be inside? Maria asked. Unknown. Could be anywhere from 5 to 15, including both terrorists and potential civilian patients. As they approached the village, Maria found herself thinking about the real medical personnel who might have worked at the clinic before it was taken over by bomb makers. Were they forced out, or worse? The thought of medical professionals being threatened or harmed because of their dedication to healing made her angry. The vehicles stopped about 1 kilometer from the target, hidden behind a small hill. Hayes gathered the team for a final briefing, using night vision equipment to study the clinic layout. Rodriguez and Williams take overwatch positions here and here, he said, pointing to elevated positions that would provide good fields of fire. Santos stays with the vehicles initially, ready to move forward when needed. What if there are civilian patients inside? Chen asked. Hayes considered this. We'll have to make real-time decisions based on what we encounter. Priority is stopping the bomb-making operation, but we minimize civilian casualties at all costs. The team moved out, leaving Maria with the vehicles and radio communications. Through her night vision scope, she watched as they approached the clinic compound. The building looked peaceful from the outside. Just another small medical facility, serving a rural community. But appearances could be deceiving, as Maria had learned both in her medical career and her military service. Sometimes the most dangerous situations looked completely normal from the outside. Overwatch in position, Rodriguez reported. No movement visible around the perimeter. Copy that, Hayes replied. Moving to breach in 30 seconds. Maria monitored the radio traffic, her medical bag ready and her mind focused on the potential casualties that might result from the mission. She had treated wounded SEALs before, but tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was because of her conversation with Hayes earlier, or maybe it was the setting, a medical facility being used for violence instead of healing. Breach, 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 Hayes called out. Through her scope, Maria could see muzzle flashes as gunfire erupted inside the compound. The operation had gone loud, which meant they had encountered resistance. Multiple tangos inside, Hayes reported, his voice calm despite the chaos. Looks like they were expecting us. The firefight continued for several minutes. With periodic reports from the assault team, Maria could hear explosions, probably grenades or demolition charges being used to destroy the bomb-making equipment. Then Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, urgent and concerned. Civilian vehicle approaching from the east. Looks like a family, Maria cursed under her breath. A civilian vehicle arriving during a firefight was everyone's worst nightmare. Innocent people could be caught in the crossfire, or the terrorists might try to use them as human shields. Vehicle is stopping, Rodriguez continued. 2 adults and what looks like a child getting out. They're heading toward the clinic entrance. Hayes's voice crackled through the radio. Santos, we need you up here now. We've got wounded, and it looks like we might have civilian casualties too. Without hesitation, Maria grabbed her medical bag and started running toward the compound. As she approached, she could see the civilian family taking cover behind their vehicle, clearly terrified by the gunfire coming from the clinic. The child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, was crying and appeared to be injured. Her father was trying to stop bleeding from her arm, while her mother held her protectively. Maria's training kicked in. She moved toward the family, calling out in the local language that she was a medic and wanted to help. The parents were initially suspicious, but when they saw her medical bag and Red Cross patches, they allowed her to examine their daughter. The child had been hit by a piece of concrete or shrapnel, creating a deep cut on her forearm. Maria quickly cleaned and bandaged the wound while explaining to the parents that they needed to leave the area immediately for their safety. As she worked, the gunfire from the clinic began to subside. Hayes' voice came through her earpiece. Compound secure. We've got 2 wounded SEALs, and what appears to be a legitimate doctor who was being held hostage. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. A real doctor had been in the clinic, probably forced to watch as his workplace was turned into a bomb factory. She finished treating the child and helped the family back to their vehicle, making sure they drove away from the danger area. Inside the clinic, she found a scene that would haunt her for years to come. The basement had been converted into a sophisticated bomb-making workshop, with enough explosives to kill hundreds of people. But upstairs, the facility still looked like a real medical clinic, complete with examination rooms and basic medical equipment. Chen was sitting against a wall, holding his reopened leg wound. Sorry, Doc, he said with a weak smile. Guess I wasn't as ready for action as I thought. Maria quickly assessed his condition and applied fresh bandages. The wound had torn open during the firefight, but he would be fine with proper treatment back at base. The second wounded SEAL was Petty Officer Williams, who had taken a bullet to his shoulder. Maria stabilized him with a combat dressing and pain medication. Then Hayes led her to the most disturbing discovery of the night, a small room where they had found Dr. Ahmad Hassan, a 60-year-old physician who had been running the clinic before it was taken over by the bomb makers. Dr. Hassan was dehydrated and showed signs of physical abuse, but he was conscious and able to speak. Through an interpreter, he explained that the terrorists had arrived 3 weeks earlier and forced him to continue treating patients while they used the basement for their bomb-making operation. They said they would kill me and destroy the clinic if I tried to warn anyone, Dr. Hassan told Maria through the translator. I had no choice but to cooperate. As Maria treated Dr. Hassan's injuries, she felt a deep connection to the older physician. Like her, he had been forced to compromise his medical ethics by circumstances beyond his control. But unlike her self-imposed exile from surgery, Dr. Hassan had been threatened with death if he didn't continue practicing medicine under impossible conditions. Tell him that he's safe now, Maria told the interpreter. And tell him that I understand what it's like to have your medical practice turned upside down by forces you can't control. Dr. Hassan looked at Maria with tired but grateful eyes, nodding as the translator shared her words. The mission was a complete success from a military standpoint. They had destroyed a significant bomb-making operation, captured valuable intelligence, and rescued a hostage. But for Maria, the experience was more personal and complicated. During the helicopter flight back to base, she sat beside Dr. Hassan, monitoring his vital signs and thinking about the parallels between their situations. He had been forced to practice medicine under terrible conditions, while she had chosen to abandon surgery altogether rather than risk another failure. Hayes watched her carefully during the flight, clearly still processing everything she had told him about her background. The way she had handled both the wounded civilians and Dr. Hassan showed the kind of medical expertise that came from years of hospital experience, confirming her story about being a trained surgeon. Back at base, Maria helped transfer the wounded to the medical facility before writing her after-action report. Dr. Hassan would be debriefed by intelligence officers and then relocated somewhere safe, away from any potential retaliation by terrorist associates. As she sat in her quarters later that night, Maria realized that her conversation with Hayes had opened a door that couldn't be closed again. Her secret was out, at least partially, and there would be consequences that she couldn't yet predict. But for the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel like she was running from her past anymore. The photograph in her medical bag showed a different person in a different uniform. But maybe it was time to stop seeing that person as a failure and start seeing her as someone who had learned from her mistakes. Outside her window, the base continued its round-the-clock operations. Tomorrow would bring new missions and new challenges, but tonight Maria felt like she was finally ready to face whatever came next. Both as a Navy medic and as someone who had once been a surgeon. 3 days after the clinic mission, Maria thought her secret was contained. Hayes had agreed to keep her surgical background confidential while they figured out how to handle her personnel records. The rest of the team knew nothing about her conversation with their commanding officer. Then everything changed in the worst possible way. The emergency alarm sounded throughout the base at 0347 hours, jolting everyone from sleep. Maria grabbed her gear and ran toward the operations center, where chaos greeted her. Multiple casualties were incoming from a helicopter crash in the mountains, and the base medical facility was already overwhelmed with wounded from another mission that had gone bad. Santos, we need you in medical now, Hayes called out as she arrived at the operations center. Mass casualty situation. Every medic on base is being called in. Maria rushed to the medical facility, where she found scenes of controlled chaos. Wounded soldiers on stretchers filled every available space, with medical personnel triaging patients according to the severity of their injuries. The small base hospital was simply not equipped to handle this many critical patients at once. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the base's chief medical officer, was directing the treatment efforts with grim efficiency. When she saw Maria, relief crossed her face. "Santos, thank God you're here. We've got more critical patients than we can handle. I need you to take charge of the overflow area." Maria quickly assessed the situation. 8 wounded soldiers required immediate attention, but only 4 could fit in the main surgical suite. The overflow area had basic medical equipment, but wasn't set up for complex procedures. Among the wounded was a young Marine whose injuries made Maria's blood run cold. Sergeant Tyler Brooks had taken shrapnel to his abdomen and was showing signs of massive internal bleeding. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, and the main surgical suite was already occupied with other critical cases. "Doc, am I going to make it?" Brooks asked weakly as Maria began her examination. He was maybe 20 years old, with bright blue eyes that reminded her painfully of David Martinez. "You're going to be fine," Maria told him, though she could see he was in serious trouble. The shrapnel had likely damaged multiple internal organs, and he needed surgery immediately. Dr. Walsh approached as Maria was starting an IV line. "How bad is he?" "He needs emergency surgery," Maria replied. "Probable bowel perforation. Possible damage to the liver and spleen. He won't survive transport to the main hospital." Dr. Walsh looked around the chaotic medical facility. "We don't have surgical space available. It'll be at least 2 hours before we can get him into the OR." "He doesn't have 2 hours," Maria said firmly. "Look at his blood pressure and pulse. He's going into shock." As if to emphasize her point, Brooks' vital signs alerted, showing dangerous drops in blood pressure and oxygen saturation. Maria could see the life draining from his eyes, the same look she had seen in David Martinez's face 4 years earlier. But this time was different. This time, she had the experience and knowledge to save a life instead of losing one. "I need to operate on him here," Maria announced, her voice cutting through the noise of the busy medical facility. Dr. Walsh stared at her in disbelief. "Santos, you're not qualified for surgery. This requires a trained surgeon." "I am a trained surgeon," Maria replied, her voice steady and calm. "And if we don't operate on him in the next 10 minutes, Sergeant Brooks is going to die." The statement hung in the air like a bomb blast. Dr. Walsh, several other medical personnel, and Hayes, who had just entered the facility, all stared at Maria in shock. "What did you say?" Dr. Walsh asked, certain she had misheard. "I'm a board-certified general surgeon," Maria repeated, never taking her eyes off Brooks' vital signs. "I completed my residency at San Antonio General Hospital. I can save this kid, but I need to do it now." Hayes stepped forward, his mind racing. He had known about Maria's surgical background, but hearing her announce it publicly in front of the medical staff was something he hadn't expected. Dr. Walsh looked between Maria and Hayes, trying to process this revelation. "Why isn't this in your personnel file?" "Because I made a mistake once that cost a patient his life," Maria replied honestly. "I joined the Navy to start over as a medic, not a surgeon. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm the only person in this facility right now who can save Sergeant Brooks." Brooks's vital signs took another dangerous dip. Maria could see they were running out of time for discussion. "Dr. Walsh, I know this is irregular, but this soldier is dying. I have the training and experience to perform this surgery. The question is whether you're going to let me try to save him or watch him die while we debate my credentials." The chief medical officer looked at the young Marine's pale face, then back at Maria. Years of military medicine had taught her to make quick decisions based on available resources and immediate needs. "What do you need?" she asked. Maria felt a surge of relief mixed with terror. She was about to perform surgery for the first time in 4 years, in less than ideal conditions, with everyone watching. But Brooks needed her, and she wouldn't let another young man die because of her hesitation. "Clear that table and get me sterile instruments," she ordered, her voice taking on the authority of a surgeon. "I need anesthesia, blood for transfusion, and someone to assist me." The medical facility transformed into a makeshift operating room with remarkable efficiency. Dr. Walsh personally assisted Maria, while the other medical staff provided support. Hayes stood at the edge of the surgical area, watching in amazement as Maria's entire demeanor changed. Gone was the quiet, competent medic he thought he knew. In her place stood a confident surgeon who moved with practiced precision and absolute focus. Her hands were steady as she made the initial incision, her voice calm as she called for instruments and supplies. Multiple perforations in the small intestine, Maria announced as she began the surgery. Significant bleeding from the spleen. Dr. Walsh, can you help me control this bleeding while I repair the bowel? Working together, they methodically addressed each of Brooke's injuries. Maria's surgical technique was flawless, her decision-making confident and rapid. She worked as if the past 4 years had been days rather than years since her last surgery. Word of the unusual surgery spread quickly through the base. More personnel gathered at the edges of the medical facility, watching in fascination as their combat medic performed complex abdominal surgery. Rodriguez and Chen arrived, having heard rumors about what was happening. They stood next to Hayes, all 3 SEALs staring in disbelief at their teammate. "Is that really Santos in there?" Rodriguez whispered. "That's Dr. Santos," Hayes replied quietly. "And apparently, she's one hell of a surgeon." The surgery continued for over an hour. Maria repaired multiple tears in Brooke's intestines, stopped the bleeding from his spleen, and carefully cleaned any contamination from his abdominal cavity. Her movements were precise and confident, guided by years of training and experience that her teammates had never suspected. Finally, she began closing the incision, layer by layer, with meticulous attention to detail. "Vital signs are stabilizing," Dr. Walsh announced. "Blood pressure coming up, heart rate normalizing." Maria allowed herself a small smile as she placed the final stitches. "He's going to make it." As they moved Brooks to recovery, spontaneous applause broke out among the medical staff and gathered personnel. Maria had just performed a complex emergency surgery under field conditions and saved a young Marine's life. Dr. Walsh pulled Maria aside as they cleaned up from the surgery. "That was extraordinary work. I've seen trauma surgeons with 20 years of experience who couldn't have handled that case better." "Thank you," Maria replied, exhaustion suddenly hitting her now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "I have to ask," Dr. Walsh continued, "why are you working as a medic when you have this level of surgical skill?" Maria looked over at Brooks, who was breathing peacefully under anesthesia, his vital signs strong and stable. "Because I lost a patient once, and I thought I wasn't good enough to be a surgeon. Tonight reminded me that maybe I was wrong about that." Hayes approached as Dr. Walsh walked away to check on other patients. The rest of the SEAL team gathered around Maria, their expressions a mixture of amazement and confusion. "So," Rodriguez said slowly, "our medic is actually a surgeon." "Was a surgeon," Maria corrected. "I haven't practiced surgery in 4 years." "Could have fooled me," Chen said, shaking his head. "That was incredible to watch. You saved that kid's life." "We need to talk," Hayes said quietly. "All of us." They moved to a quiet corner of the base, away from the continuing medical activities. Maria sat down heavily, the emotional weight of the evening finally hitting her. "I know you have questions," she began. "Just one." "Really?" Rodriguez said. "Why didn't you trust us enough to tell us the truth?" The question hit Maria harder than she had expected. These men had become her brothers, had trusted her with their lives countless times, and she had been keeping a fundamental part of her identity secret from them. "It wasn't about trust," she said softly. "It was about shame. I left surgery because I made a mistake that cost someone their life. I didn't want you to see me as a failure." "A failure?" Chen laughed, but not mockingly. "Santos, you just performed surgery that probably saved that Marine's life. How is that failure?" Hayes sat down beside her. "Tell them what you told me about David Martinez." Maria took a deep breath and shared the story of her last surgery in San Antonio, the young man who had died because of her inexperience and emotional involvement. Her teammates listened without interruption, their respect for her growing rather than diminishing as she explained her past. "So you left everything behind and started over as a Navy medic," Rodriguez summarized when she finished. "I couldn't save lives as a surgeon anymore," Maria explained. "Every time I looked at a patient, I saw David's face. I thought I could serve better as a medic, where the decisions were more straightforward." But tonight? Hayes prompted. Maria looked back toward the medical facility where Brooks was recovering. Tonight, I saw that same young face, but this time I knew I could save him. 4 years of combat medicine taught me to control my emotions and focus only on what the patient needs. Chen leaned forward. You realize what this means, don't you? We've been working with one of the most qualified medical personnel in the entire theater. You could probably teach the doctors at the main hospital a few things. I'm still just a medic, Maria protested. No, Hayes said firmly. You're Dr. Maria Elena Santos, and it's time you started acting like it. Over the following days, word of Maria's surgical background spread throughout the special operations community. Her successful surgery on Sergeant Brooks became legendary, with details growing more dramatic with each retelling. Dr. Walsh officially requested that Maria's personnel records be updated to reflect her surgical qualifications. The Navy brass, initially concerned about the discrepancy, ultimately decided that having a board-certified surgeon working with special operations teams was an asset worth keeping. Brooks made a full recovery, spending several days thanking Maria every time she checked on him. He would eventually return to full duty, carrying a scar that reminded him daily of the medic who had saved his life. Morrison, who had been recovering from his own injuries, visited Maria a week after the surgery. I heard what happened, he said. I wanted to thank you again for saving my life, but now I understand why you were so good at it. You would have survived anyway, Maria replied. Combat medics are trained to handle trauma cases. Maybe, Morrison said. But I feel better knowing that my life was in the hands of a real surgeon, not just a medic who got lucky. The conversation that had started with Hayes's suspicions about Maria's background had evolved into something none of them had expected. Instead of being exposed as a fraud, Maria had been revealed as someone far more qualified than anyone had imagined. Hayes called her into his office for a final discussion about her status with the team. I've been thinking about your situation, he said. The Navy wants to transfer you to a field surgical unit, where you can use your full qualifications. Maria felt her stomach drop. Sir, I don't want to leave the team. I told them that, Hayes replied with a smile. I argued that having a surgeon embedded with a SEAL team gives us capabilities that no other unit has. They agreed to let you stay. With some conditions. What conditions? You'll be promoted to lieutenant, commensurate with your medical degree and experience. You'll also be expected to provide surgical support for other special operations teams when needed. Maria considered this. It meant accepting responsibility as a surgeon again, something she had run away from 4 years earlier. But it also meant staying with the team that had become her family. What about David Martinez? She asked. What about the fact that I failed as a surgeon? Hayes leaned back in his chair. Santos, every surgeon loses patience. What makes someone a good surgeon isn't never making mistakes. It's learning from those mistakes and using that knowledge to save the next patient. He gestured toward the medical facility. Sergeant Brooks is alive because of what you learned from losing David Martinez. That kid's survival is David's legacy too. For the first time in 4 years, Maria felt like she could breathe freely. The secret that had defined her life was finally out in the open. And instead of destroying her career, it had revealed new possibilities she had never considered. I accept the promotion and the conditions, she said. But I want to stay with this team. Wouldn't have it any other way, Doc, Hayes replied. That evening, the team gathered in the recreation area for what had become an informal celebration. Rodriguez raised a beer in Maria's direction. To Doc Santos, he announced. The surgeon who pretended to be a medic, who saved our asses more times than we can count. To Maria Elena Vasquez Santos, Hayes corrected. The surgeon who learned that healing isn't just about perfect technique. It's about having the courage to try again after you fail. As they shared stories and laughter, Maria realized that her journey wasn't really about hiding from her past or starting over with a new identity. It was about learning that real strength comes from acknowledging your failures while finding the courage to keep serving others. The photograph in her medical bag showed someone who had been running from her mistakes. But the woman sitting with her SEAL teammates was someone who had learned that mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. Outside, The sounds of base operations continued, as another day ended in Afghanistan. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to save lives. But for the first time in 4 years, Maria was ready to face them not as someone hiding from her past, but as someone who had learned to integrate all parts of her story into a stronger, more complete person. Dr. Maria Elena Santos had finally stopped running from herself, and her SEAL brothers had her back every step of the way forward.